everyone, and welcome to the first of a series of CPHR Leaders Lounge interviews with prominent HR professionals. Our goal is to share insight from senior HR members who have been dealing with some of the same challenges many of you are facing, and some who are dealing with extreme adversity that are unique to their industry. I believe hearing from our fellow colleagues who are driving and representing our HR profession so well can be very valuable for us all as we begin the path to what will be a sustained recovery to normal later this year. As our first guest, we have an HR professional working in an industry and company that has been nearly decimated this past year. That is the aviation industry and Air Canada. Joining me is Mark Olivier, Senior Director, Talent Engagement Diversity at Air Canada. He is a CPHR member. Mark started his career with Air Canada in 1988 in the heart of the in-flight operations branch. Through his 31 plus years with the organization, he has led or played a key leadership role in the following areas: cabin crew program development, coach, mentor, regulatory affairs, health and safety, customer service training, and design operations, culminating in his current role in people culture and communication, where he has overall responsibility for four main streams: talent acquisition, leadership succession and development, languages, diversity and inclusion, and finally, employee engagement and recognition. Mark's professional background started in industrial relations and aviation management. Throughout his career, he has had the privilege to be part of so many cultural transformations at Air Canada, from major mergers and acquisitions, establishing a talent and diversity board, and most recently, a center of expertise for change management. Mark, welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this.
Well, thank you, Anthony. Thank you for having me, and hello to everybody out there.
So Mark, let's get right into it. As everyone knows, your industry has been one of the hardest hit industries during this pandemic, with business being down about 85% from previous levels. This has had an impact on staffing with mass layoffs, voluntary early retirements, and staff who are still employed, but walking with a cloud over them, not knowing when the next shoe will drop. How have you held this all together, Mark? In particular with employees feeling so much stress, anxiety, and uncertainty about their future? And specifically, what has Air Canada done to help people keep sane during this very turbulent time?
Well, that's a very charged question, but thank you for asking. I mean, yes, we have been probably one of the hardest hit industries. I would say the health sector probably more worse off in terms of just the amount of pressure being put on them. But quite honestly, the aviation industry, in my entire career through bankruptcy protection and 9/11, you name it, this has been the absolute worst circumstance that I have ever experienced. And you know, what I've learned, at least through my experience in HR, has been that, and you know, proud to be an HR representative, is that we are truly resilient individuals to help our company stay afloat, literally. I heard an expression from someone one day to say that, you know, your team is so agile and pivots so often, you should actually just work for the National Ballet, because that's how often we keep moving. But, you know, humor aside, despite all of the physical separation that we've experienced over the last year and a half, our team has become even closer as a result of this. And what I think is, something I think I read from you, Anthony, was you said, you know, we want to get away from being seen as tactical partners and being more strategic. Never before have I seen that come to life more quickly than through the pandemic, where HR really is the architect of the business. We are a true partner of architects of the business. And you know, maybe in the past, people would come to us, obviously, for the very typical traditional HR support. Now more than ever, they're asking us about everything from talent to performance to engagement to culture. And these are non-HR individuals. So they're really exercising their HR muscle more than I've ever seen before, which is really wonderful for those of us working in the HR profession, because you see untapped abilities, you see new perspectives that you were trying desperately as an HR person to try to promote, and now it's being embraced from the other side. So instead of us pushing, it's actually being pulled from us, and it really is encouraging. So from the most terrible situation, we've seen things grow and change extraordinarily. with people's abilities changing, untapped and unsung heroes coming out of the woodwork within the airline, people that we might not have ever recognized as being true heroes for the airline. And I don't mean that from, just the standard expression, but really the way in which they've helped us recreate our business has really been an eye-opening and amazing experience for us. When you talk about, what has changed or what we've done to literally stay sane or prime for the future, I think trying to embrace what's coming, and now with the weather starting to turn at least better for us in the East Coast, you start to think about sort of these renewed interest of what's going to happen after COVID goes away. But there's an expression that I think maybe you might have heard before, some of your colleagues, which is when you ask people as a standard greeting, how are you? Most people say, I'm fine, but we also know that there's an undercurrent of COVID behind that. And we say, how do you mean that now? And we actually probe even further to find out what it is that they're saying that they're actually not fine about, so that we can make those very important connections, because that's going to make the difference between our employees and our colleagues surviving the stress, the anxiety, the frustrations, you name it, all of those things that are coming into play right now. And even the experience that we're all having on virtual platforms with Zoom and Teams and you name it, that in it of itself has been a huge growth spurt in terms of people's ability to be able to manage within those environments. But what we do to stay sane and to stay motivated, I think the key is communication. It always has been that. How we communicate, the things that we try to say to ensure that there is accuracy in the information between what we hear in social media, the radio, the TV, hearsay, and what we're trying to express to our employees, our colleagues, and our customers as all the things that we're trying to do to remain resilient, safe, of course, as an airline. But there's so much competing information out there that I think as a company, our communications department really stepped to the forefront to keep things very current and very accurate for people to feel, I really understand what's happening, what Air Canada's doing, what the government's doing, how we're working together. I don't know if you want me to go on, but I have much more to say.
That's been great that you highlighted that, because one of the things we have seen within the profession is just the growth of our member base across Canada. Most provincial associations, as you know, because the profession is regulated provincially, have seen an increase in members flocking to the HR profession because of the leadership role that HR has been seen as playing over the past 12 months. And more importantly, we've been called upon by stakeholders like governments, whether it be provincial and federal, asking us for our opinion and to contribute to the agenda, because there's just so much happening. And you touched on the element about, without necessarily calling it that or labeling it that, but on the health and wellness, but how people are really feeling and dealing with a mental illness challenge because of being shut out and not being able to connect with people. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and that human interaction connection is so important. And just asking people, how are you? And that's fine. As you say, there is an undercurrent in that because so much has happened to them, especially being remote for so long. But that leads me to, kind of my next question, which, as you know, Air Canada is really a pillar of the Canadian economy. Without the aviation industry, and specifically Air Canada, which is just such a large carrier transporting, Canadians around the world and even within Canada in remote areas. How have you been able to still maintain visibility and influence within the organization when interaction opportunities have been so limited, Mark?
Well, visibility is a really good word. When you say that, I think about, what we hear and what we see as being, things that are visible to us. And it's always about perceptions. As we all know, perception often replaces reality if people believe something, and then we're caught in between trying to make sure that the information is accurate. And whether it's through virtual connections like we're doing now or real face-to-face connections, we have to maintain a lifeline with both our clients and our colleagues and be sensitive to the changes that are happening throughout COVID. After all, I consider HR, a business entity that really must maintain its accessibility, right? And it's easy to pick up a phone and ask for HR advice or support, but to show that, we understand the perceptions that are out there. So we're really in touch, or we have a pulse on what's happening within the airline, especially with our colleagues, for us to be able to be relevant. That's the most important thing. If people think we're out of touch or we're just applying standard rules and procedures, they're going to lose interest in us very quickly, and we have to be relevant. And, in terms of influence, well, plain and simple, I believe it's all about relationships. Our HR business partners or strategic partners, I'm not sure what they're termed in other provinces, but they play an immensely important role as being advocates and brokers, as I like to call them, to the many things that everybody thinks is important to the business, be it about talent or training or diversity or culture or pay issues or pension, you name it. But they act on behalf of those of us that we consider ourselves centers of expertise to make informed decisions and move people in the right direction. I think everyone more than ever, especially during COVID times, wants practical, user-friendly, just-in-time solutions. And especially for large companies like our own, there is this undercurrent that I like to call going rogue, where departments will say, I can't get the help I need. I'm just going to figure it out for myself. And then suddenly there's 4 variations on a theme that are occurring within the company that let us lose much more consistency and control. And I don't mean control in a bad way, but really about managing a business in a very sane approach. If people decide to make more and more decisions on their own, they might think it's good for the short term, but it could be more harmful in the future. So as I said, it really is about developing those relationships so that over time, the instinct is there for them to come to HR so that we're not being difficult, but we're being collaborative for the right reasons.
That's great. That's great. Mark, I'm sure you've been asked this question by others in the past, and I'm curious about how it will change necessarily with Air Canada. But, when we talk about the future of work, and clearly we've seen how life has changed in the last 12 months and how people can adapt to working remotely. What are your thoughts on how it could look for Air Canada? And, do you think that you will, in your industry, go back to the way it was? Or do you foresee changes in that industry as well?
Oh, I don't think we'll ever go back to the way it was. There's a new appetite for the new reality for sure. Although we were all thrown into the deep end, like many companies, that we just had to learn to live with this remote environment. To be honest, Air Canada was not a traditional remote work type of setup organization. We were very sort of old school. Unless you were working in the front line, like a flight attendant or a pilot or a gate agent, the mass majority of us were all still working from within typical Air Canada office space. But because of COVID, we were really thrown into this without much, ability to change our scope or an approach. We had to very quickly reinvent ourselves. How to be remote friendly, how to live within this environment with all of these new tools that people were promoting. Well, Zoom is fantastic. Well, so is Teams. Well, so is Moodle. We were just getting used to these things. And of course, baptism by fire forces us to think in a very accelerated way, that's for sure. But I think the complexities were even more acute when you factor in the different types of business that we have as an airline, right? We have travel, exposure, regulatory, state laws, a majority of employees that are already remote and used to that environment. And then, of course, there's all those safety aspects and features that we have that go hand in hand. But our organization has not been typically seen as a remote work or a flexible work type of organization. And the company, what I've seen in the last year and a half is that at the beginning, everybody was just delighted with this concept of being in their pajamas and working from home. And then suddenly there was this slingshot of emotion where people were saying, I can't take it anymore. I actually need to get away from my family, my dog. I don't want to have so much overlap between personal and professional that I can't keep track of it anymore. And so what we've discovered is that people are going to be asking us very quickly when the world gets to whatever new normal it's going to be, that we find a new hybrid solution. And so we're coming up with something called flexible work arrangements, which we're just building right now. But the concept is that you have different hours of work, different places of work, and different schedules of work that between, the employee and the manager, you're going to be able to figure out what is the right fit for you moving forward. Of course, there are the standard essential workers that have to go to their, what I call their office, whether it's a flight attendant or a pilot. But many of us, including myself, have realized that we can be equally productive and not have to drive 2 hours to the office every day. So we're going to look for a new balance between that moving into the future. But we're waiting for, I guess, the right triggers and signals that the world is going to tell us, which is cases going down, which is non-essential businesses opening up, for us to have a better sense of when we can start opening the floodgates of that new policy, let's call it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I've been asked that as well by various reporters on, future of work and what do I think. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about hybrid. I think it's definitely moving that way going forward. The challenge has been the past year is when you're forced to work from home, it's very different than having an option to work from home, which I think historically that's what people have wanted, the flexibility to be able to do so on their own dime when they choose to do so. But being forced to stay in a place where, as you say, maybe you're, both partners are working from home in a small apartment, making it very challenging. And then you can't disconnect between work and home. What's work? What's home? Because you're always in your home doing work. And then if you're having dinner after dinner, you say, I'm going to go back to the office, which is a couple of steps away from the dining room table. So it becomes extremely challenging. And that's what I think, people have faced. And I think you're right. People have wanted to go back, if it, of course, Health Canada allows it. And I guess that varies by province, but let's hope that day is coming where, the flexibility is actually there.
Yeah,
that's a great point. Mark, you're a leader in your own right, clearly, and you've done so much in your career, but can you share some examples of what you think good leadership looks like during this pandemic?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think it's the way, good leadership comes down to the way you act and the way you behave. People can read your body language, can understand how you see their, I guess you call it lot in life, very quickly. All these terms have existed in our competency models over many years, the way in which you act and behave. But I think that what's coming to the forefront are terms like empathy and relationship management and empowerment. Those words were always part of our model, but certain leaders, let's face it, are simply not as good as others when you have to put on the empathy hat. And for us to be able to give them tips and tools and tricks to be able to be more comfortable in that soft side of management has been something that we've had to push very hard for. Some it comes ever so naturally and they're fantastic at it, but others are saying, I'm very much black and white. I'm very much linear in my thinking. And I find it very difficult to cope in this environment because now I'm helping my colleagues cope and I never had to do that. So sharing knowledge, creating better networks, you can't do it on your own, especially in this environment. You have to lean on other people. Not only is it good from an HR profession to say leaning on other people allows them to grow and develop, and it helps our succession programs. We see all the silver linings, but for a good leadership to be able to take that to the next level means that we're trying to create more stability where stability doesn't exist or where it's lacking. And we don't want to see lags in decisions or connectivity. And for people to be able to say, I don't have to call Anthony for all my answers. I know that there's 4 other people ensures that the business keeps running. So paying attention to those cues, do people read the audience very well? Some leaders don't. They're just looking at their notes and doing what they need to do. And other leaders are standing there paying attention to the voice, the tone, the body language, the way in which a person has expressed themselves that is very different from what they were before, and them going, I think I need to call that person afterwards and connect. So it may sound cliche, but being transparent, being empathetic, simplifying things, also demonstrating confidence for the future. I mean, as a leader, we all have to say, I know it's bad. I realize it's bad. I'm not putting my head in the sand, but I also know as a leader that something good is coming, and let me share that with you so you feel encouraged and confident about the future. So especially when things are, terrible right now, but we know that things are within our power, let's build off of the things that we have control over and let's talk about the things that we can do to influence that we may not have complete control over. That gives people confidence, and I think that's what good leadership is about.
Yeah, it's interesting what you just said, because I've always believed what makes a strong leader, an effective leader versus your average leader, is really having a sense of emotional intelligence. As you said, your emotional quotient, being aware of what that does, the triggers, and how you can influence people. And as you say, having empathy, dealing with situations under crisis, and so on. So I think none more than this year in terms of how that has resonated and really meant more for leaders throughout. To really have more of a sense of that. So I'm glad you've actually talked a little bit about that, because that's one of my, penchants and fortes that I really believe in, having strong EI for leaders down the road. That's really, to me, what separates really effective and strong leaders from your average leader. So I'm glad you touched about that. Mark, I have a couple more questions around your industry that really, I think are important. I'd love to really dwell on them, if you don't mind, for a couple more minutes. And, the first one's really around training and development. Obviously Air Canada spends bundles, huge expense on your, expense line and your operating costs for the airline industry. And of course, largely for pilot training. But I'm just curious this past year, more than ever, because there's so many pilots who have been, asked to stay home. Obviously their hours have been cut, but they need to still stay sharp, even though they're not flying planes with people in it. How have you managed this when people, still couldn't necessarily meet or be together, and they've had to be socially distant? Because clearly for the passenger returning back to flying, they want to have a sense that, hey, the pilot's been flying using, machines, so to speak, right? Simulators, even if they're not flying people. Like what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, not being as well versed in the world of pilot training, but I can tell you for sure that, throughout my 30 plus years, I've always been amazed at hearing that a pilot can become fully certified without even stepping on board a real aircraft. And they can walk into an airline with their CV and it shows that I can actually fly this aircraft. Now, I know some of you on this call or this session might go, oh my goodness, how could that be possible? But I can tell you all that, Air Canada has probably some of the highest standards for training and for safety that would always make me feel confident, not promoting it just because I'm from within the company, but seeing what we've done. I mean, I lived many years within in-flight service training flight attendants. That was part of my beginning career. And I see very similar things happening in both sides of that frontline industry with pilots and flight attendants. I mean, sadly, yes, we had to reduce our workforce because the flying just isn't there. So we have pilots on furlough, we have flight attendants on furlough, and in some cases, that made it actually easy for us to manage the difficulties around social distancing, training scenarios, people going on board simulators. We have simulators for both pilots and flight attendants, if you would imagine. And yes, they're slightly more sophisticated for the pilot, but honestly, I spoke to some of the folks just recently about some of the training protocols. Everything that you would think of that you're doing in the office or in general practice by way of converting into a COVID-friendly environment, we applied on steroids within training. So, less classrooms, more virtual training if necessary. If the pilots are in the simulator, they're only allowed to be in there one at a time, and then there's a lot more gaps between simulator sessions so that they can do a deep cleaning, complete strip down and cleaning of the equipment. So, I mean, just like anybody would be naturally nervous about going into a closed environment, knowing that somebody else has just been in there prior. Over the last year and a half, we have had no issues. We've had, if I can even recall on one hand, any cases of contamination. So it's been extremely low, but putting in staggered training sessions because of the luxury of having less people to train allowed us to be very particular in the way in which we managed it. It didn't stop us from training. Pilots still have to retain current training, just like flight attendants, on a regular basis. We never delayed it. We just extended it with less people to be able to do it the right way.
Great. That's great. I think that's a great sense of comfort for a lot of people who want to return to the skies sometimes. And so that's great. And Mark, the last question I have for you, and I know it's on a lot of people's minds, especially people that have family members across Canada, around the world. How do you see a return to normal for, not only Air Canada, but the airline industry as a whole? I mean, do you see a future with vaccine passports, a return to normal life later this year, or do you think it'll be several years, as some experts are proclaiming?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that. I mean, I do get on calls on a weekly basis that we all get together and talk about both return to work protocols, vaccine passports, applications to track and trace people. What are going to be the possible state laws in place across this globe that will either require flight attendants and pilots to have vaccine passports to even land in that country? We don't know all of these answers yet, but even Air Canada, what I love about our company is that we want to be at the forefront of that technology, and we're looking at applications that we can even support government with on contact tracing, on secure information that would say Mark Olivier does have his vaccine and it's current and it's legitimate. So we're looking at that not only to support the government, but to support Air Canada in it of itself, so that we can say, as much as we want to be delicate with privacy issues, we want to also know that the majority of our population has actually decided to get the vaccine, so that when people are circulating back into our buildings, we have a greater sense of comfort. So there's this IT technology side of things where our department really wants to be able to assist the government, up to and including setting up what I call pop-up clinics across Canada. Our medical officer is working with various provinces, including BC, to set up pop-up clinics to say, I don't think that the government has enough people to man all of these new stations across the country. They'll support the medical staff, but we can support the front end staff with all of our furloughed employees who know how to do certain things. This is how we want to get ourselves into the game to support both the boost of the economy, but return to travel.
Indeed. Yeah, no, there's a lot to consider. There's no doubt about it. And as you say, there's also different countries and different governments who might impose different regulations, right? So yeah, I'm sure it's not an easy time, given still the unknown and how long this will run, and hopefully that the vaccines will be successful as they continue to roll out around the world. So that's great. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to participate today and give us your insight on what you've been doing as an organization, and you yourself as a leader in HR, and how you've been, helping your team navigate these very turbulent times and waters. So, you're our first guest, but I really appreciate you taking the time out of I'm sure is an extremely busy schedule. So, Mark, thank you so much on behalf of all of the CPHRs and the HR professionals. All right.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much, Anthony. I appreciate being with you.
Thank you again. All right. All the best, Mark, and good luck. And let's hope we can take to the sky safely later this year.
Yes.
All the best. Bye-bye now.